Welcome back. So this year's official Heritage Day celebrations are taking place in Oudtshoorn, that's in the Little Karoo region of the Western Cape, where Deputy President Paul Mashatile will deliver the keynote address. The event is being held through an intergovernmental effort between Sports, Arts and Culture Department, Western Cape officials and the Oudtshoorn municipality itself. The theme this year is Reimagine Our Heritage Institutions for a New Era. The Bridgeton Sports Ground in Oudtshoorn is already welcoming scores of revelers as performers lay the foundation or the groundwork, if you like, ahead of the keynote address by the Deputy President. Paul Mashatile has in previous occasions pointed out that South Africa's museums as cultural and heritage institutions play a vital role in healing communities and preventing the recurrence of past injustices. He was also at Decolonizing, that's just outside Oudtshoorn, as part of the presidential 10 Million Trees flagship program, which is aimed at mobilizing everyone in the country to plant trees in order to mitigate against effects of climate change. So we're watching all those developments for you as they continue to unfold. And as we do that, we'd love to hear from you too. How are you spending this, the 24th of September, National Heritage Day? Give us a call if you can, 011 714 0677 or 0618. We'd love to hear from you throughout our program. Now, as we continue marking this Heritage Day, let's look at preserving culture as essential for maintaining cultural diversity, fostering a sense of identity, and passing down knowledge to future institutions or generations. And to help us, I suppose, navigate that sometimes complex terrain, let's bring in Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, who's a heritage researcher and joins us now live in our studios. Happy Heritage Day. Thanks for popping by.
Thank you, Ayanda, and happy Heritage to you too, and also happy Heritage Day to the viewers at home.
It's a moment for us, I suppose, to kind of lift our foot off the pedal for a while. I think it's been an incredibly eventful week so far with the Madlanga Commission taking place and everything else, but I don't think it's any less of an important discussion that I'm hoping we're having as a country. It's one thing for us to be dressed like this, and I think it's a bit of a treat, but I wonder how much time is actually taken to seep our mental faculties and our understanding into what this day is meant to be about.
Thank you for that question, because I think it's really important to also understand the origins of the idea of us celebrating Heritage Day in particular, because that moment itself, that moment of imagining this day, was informed by a series of compromises that we always have. It was part of the transition, and you will recall that the IFP during that moment of transition was not able to fall into the idea of going ahead with the election. And at the last minute, we had the IFP coming in. And as part of that negotiation by the late Mangosuthu Buthelezi, we then mobilized that to retain the idea of Shaka Day, which was always celebrated in the former homeland, KwaZulu, Zululand. So as part of that negotiated settlement, that's what he brought to the table, that we will fall in and join this transition party if that also is included. And that's part of that whole package with Ngonyama Trust and so on. So it was a compromise. When then President Mandela received this, he then thought, well, there's so many different identities in this country. So to find a way where we can have our diversity also recognized. So then it moved from being called Shaka Day to Heritage Day, and the idea was to celebrate all our different colors and all our different identities, so to speak. But then we started seeing another moment where there were ruptures around these identities where they were quite contested. I mean, you'd find that there's the 100% Zulu, there's the 100% Venda, the Khoisan emerging there as the first people. And in 2007, then enter the late Bishop Tutu, who then said, well, since we can't find each other in this diversity, how about we make yet another compromise? And that's when he said, well, we all sit around a fire and we like to braai a lot, and we're quite known for that. So he came up with this idea of a Braai Day, which is also now contested, as others feel that it's actually trivializing.
Yeah, and watered down.
It's watering down this idea of these identities that are supposed to play this big role of healing the nation and bringing us all together.
It's fascinating that you walk us through that cocktail of compromises, so to speak, because in many ways it feels like a whole lot more work still needs to happen in order to achieve that kind of social cohesion that I think was envisioned when we started imagining what this day would look like. Today, we're still dealing with elements, let's face it, of those cultural struggles. The term I'm looking for is anyway, it's escaped me now, but you know, this concept that in some instances certain cultures are not welcomed, right? Especially in, you know, parts of KwaZulu-Natal where there's been a lot of that criticism, even in the wake of our most recent election.
Well, I mean, I think one of the first things that we would need to do is to problematize the idea of these tribes.
Yes.
That we seem to uphold, because that's where you find these tensions where certain groupings are elevated above others or are deemed to be more superior or more rooted in this landscape or this heritage, which is the land that we've inherited, because heritage really is about that which we inherited from those who came before us. So now with this contestation, you find that these identities are mobilized. However, we need to problematize them because these are not identities that we are making. When the native people of South Africa encountered the settlers, the white settlers, there was this idea that there was a need to administer this. So it was an administrative strategy to put those natives into various categories. And this is also a very Eurocentric idea that we need to write things down, we need to put these ones into categories, and based on what they could hear, they could hear a bit of a click here, and then maybe these clicks are similar to these ones, and therefore we'll call you all Khoisan. First it was the San, and then the Khoi, and then it was, oh, let's just bring them all together because it was too complicated. And then there's a bit of Xhosa there that is also formed in that moment. Even the idea of a Zulu nation is also a creation of the settler communities in their struggle to try and administer these groupings that they encountered on their arrival. And yet we find that we allowed these categories to continue into the present, and now we're holding them up as, you know, a hill that we will die on, whereas it is a label that is assigned by the settlers. So I would say if we were to problematize this idea, it would be to actually just disrupt the whole idea of a tribe. We must kill the tribe, and something that could be more valuable maybe is our clan names, because they seem to be more meaningful, because it's something that comes from us. They haven't changed. If you are Mthethwa, you will recite the same clan names, whether you've met or not. Or if you are, say, for example, Jola, all the Jolas in the country would recite the same thing. And for me, that is the knowledge that has been neglected all along, because the colonial archive, those categories, those records that were written, are the ones then that get into these institutions that today we are celebrating, protecting these museums and so on, without regarding the oral tradition that comes with these clan names.
Fascinating. You talk about disruption. I think a big moment of disruption unfolded in the Constitutional Court earlier this year as you speak about clan names, which sometimes I think used interchangeably with surnames, and what's emerged from the Apex Court. But we'll speak about that in just a moment as we continue our build-up to the official Heritage Day celebrations that are going to unfold in Oudtshoorn, and that is, of course, in the Western Cape. It's where we anticipate Paul Mashatile in his capacity as the acting president to deliver the keynote address. And as you can see on the side of your screen there, celebrations certainly well underway, a outpouring, in fact I should say a melting pot of cultural expression unfolding, and as soon as there's any movement from the program directors, we'll certainly take you there live. Now, as we continue marking this Heritage Day in South Africa, let's look at preserving culture as an essential part of maintaining cultural diversity, fostering a sense of identity, and passing down knowledge to future generations. Still with us is Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, who's a researcher with Inhlulamiti South Africa Scenarios Trust, and joins us once again. Great to see you, and thanks for sticking around as we continue taking stock of this moment in history. I think it's still fair to say, given how much history continues to unfold. And just before we spoke to Umlondi, we were touching on the concept of disruption in, you know, cultural expression and just our understanding of our own identities. And I think top of mind for many people is what took place at the Constitutional Court when it essentially ruled that men are allowed to take on the surnames of their wives and not compelled to do so. But a lot of the people who are apprehensive about that actually pointed to culture, which sociologists have told us for a very long time constantly evolves.
You're quite correct, Ayanda. I mean, culture is not static, but also our nation is a secular nation.
Yeah.
So we don't subscribe to any belief system. We're not a Christian nation. We're not prescribed to Islam or anything else. Even all these different identities or cultural identities or what has been deemed to be traditional identities that we've formed are not necessarily prescriptive, because there's an understanding again that there's this diversity that we have. In terms of the Constitutional Court outcome, I mean, it's unfortunate that there's this misinterpretation or it's been misconstrued, but we tend to focus a lot on headlines.
Yeah.
And I think media also needs to actually think quite carefully around that, you know, because these headlines or clickbait, the headline would say, now men can take their wives' surnames, and then people just read that and they don't go deeper to actually understand. And you correctly say, no one is compelled to. And I mean, I've been listening to a lot of people talking about how this undermines our cultural practice. And again, these identities that I've spoken to earlier, these categories, these colonial categories that were assigned to us, then we start mobilizing those and we hold on so strongly to them, saying, well, this is my culture, this is my tradition. Whereas what we should be looking at when it comes to that particular subject matter is finding ways to actually unpack their origins and actually take seriously the work of oral tradition. Because once again, as much as we call it tradition, it's still informed by what we find in the colonial archive. So instead of, you know, forming a critique on how that archive was formed and how these categories have been carried out and how they've found their expression in the present, how do we then allow other ways of knowing, which is then the knowledge that is carried by what we deem as the knowledge keepers in the form of our elders. We know our elders will tell stories, but also in our communities we have people who are imbongis, who not only see things, you know, they're not like the traditional healers, but it's those who can recite things. And this is supposed to be a natural phenomenon where people are gifted, and it's something that's also inherited. And taking that knowledge and recognizing it as knowledge proper. So then how does that kind of knowledge then come into contact with this colonial record and have a conversation with each other, so that when we now form these identities, these new South African identities that are binding for all of us, then it's not just one way of knowing, which tends to be Eurocentric, that is then informing the future, but then we bring forth also these ways of knowing that have been largely unrecognized or largely deemed as belief systems, not knowledge or primitive. How do we then elevate those so that they can be in conversation with that record? And I think maybe we can find new ways of understanding our past, because not only are we just looking at our past or that moment of encounter using the colonial lens, but also there's a bit of that native lens that then, you know, puts color to that knowledge. And I think we'll have a better understanding of where we come from so that we can effectively move forward to the future.
It's about moving the decolonial project beyond the walls of just universities, which is where it seems it has been concentrated for quite some time. Xolelwa, you're going to stick around with us. We've asked our viewers to also weigh in on what they make of this Heritage Day, and Temba from Limpopo has given us a call. Temba, good morning. You're live on the SABC. What do you make of this National Heritage Day? How are you celebrating?
Yeah, actually, you know, the problem is this. We can't celebrate. I'm at a rural area, and then here our councils, our leaders, we don't have sports ground, we don't have facilities, we don't have nothing to show our children, our heritage. So I think, you know, I'm from at the rural area called the Valdezia at Limpopo. nothing is there. The councillors are not doing things, so how are we going to teach our children? That's the problem.
Fair enough. And I suppose there must have been efforts, Themba, at some stage to engage some officials. What's your sense about how responsive they've been to some of the concerns you've raised?
Actually, it worries me a lot. You see, some places, Soshanguve, Joburg, and Pumalanga, you will see children that they know what to do about this Heritage Month or Heritage Day. But for our concern is this: we don't have any facilities. We don't have a playground. We don't have anything. You see, children are still going to to smoke some drugs. They don't have to play for football or whatever. It's rugby or anything. We don't have sport ground. We don't have anything, in fact.
Fair enough. Themba from Limpopo, thanks for giving us a call. If you also want to be part of the discussion, 011-714-0677 or 0618 throughout the course of the day. We've also been showing you visuals there from Oudtshoorn, where you could see a number of ministers arriving in the lead up to the official start of the celebrations taking place in the Western Cape. It's all taking place at the Brishton Sports Ground in the Little Karoo region. And once again, there are those visuals for you. John Steenhuisen is there, Dean McPherson, I spotted Njimuchecha earlier on, and I imagine several others will continue to arrive ahead of the keynote address. But once again, Xolelwa, you with us in studio. Interesting sentiments there from Themba, helping us, I suppose, redirect the discussion to what all of this means ultimately for people on the ground who are taking these issues seriously and frankly are tired of the speeches and lip service.
Yes. And I think it's a very valid question because, and once again, and I think even these celebrations are yet another, way to improvise, as a way of putting this Band-Aid over our gunshot wound, because we still have this very painful history and the effects thereof have not been corrected. So what Themba is speaking to is the lack of economic transformation. And then what you would find is that our officials tend to use these moments such as heritage. And heritage is the one concept that has been widely abused. So not only do we celebrate heritage today on Heritage Day, if you think of any other day really, whether it's June 16th or December 16th, Day of Reconciliation, it's loaded with all these things about our past that we just can't deal with. So we tend to then create this these phenomena, or we improvise, so to speak, and then we have these celebrations and united in our diversity and so on. And in a way, there's other scholars who would say this is making heritage pay. We take the idea of heritage and we load it with all our problems. The fact that we cannot find each other is not really informed only by the differences in our color or in terms of how we dress on Heritage Day, but there's also this lack of economic transformation that can close the gap in terms of our inequalities. So instead of dealing with those issues, we tend to, take these things to heritage, make heritage pay again, instead of making, what about our economic structure? What about our economic policies? How do we transform our society? How do we make those who've benefited from the past pay instead of making heritage pay for all these big things? And we hope that somehow, after we've had today and dressed up and learned from each other and how we dress and how we speak and we've cooked, and then we hope that we've created yet another Kumbaya moment. It's now 24th of September. Comes Day of Reconciliation, we're going to get our gear again. And also what's interesting is that even when we celebrate these things, we're so divided. I mean, you've got KZN there with Shaka Day, and you've got Paul Mashatile in the Northern Cape doing something else, but we're all supposed to be united in this diversity.
Yeah, and Paul Mashatile is in the Western Cape, by the way, but I think the point still stands. This idea that sometimes it feels a bit performative, doesn't it? Even in contexts where there is a heteronormative community, let's call it, or not a homogenous community is what I'm trying to say. Even then, it feels like we're there for the photo op opportunity, and then we go right back into our corners.
Exactly, and it's so sad because, as I've said, there's potential in, making heritage get us to understand where we come from, like using these institutions. But now, because it's a performance, we're improvising, it turns to be, it looks like we're just only scratching the surface. And that's what's actually frustrating to those on the ground who live with no water. And here we come again, and there's a big marquee, and it's a song and dance moment. And then when everybody goes back home, we go back to our separate enclaves, where we go back to, our shacks, and others go back to behind their high walls, where they have private security and private health and, everything privatized. Those who can, actually part of the elite, then go back. So these moments, actually, as I was saying, they seem like just a band-aid over a very deep wound that needs to be dealt with. Because really, if you could use these days to actually deal with that wound, to actually have those difficult conversations about even these contested ways of knowing ourselves, then I think it would become more meaningful, because we have to have these difficult conversations so that we can move past. So at least if we can deal with our collective wound, then maybe I would say we are doing something, and then the next step, then we deal with the critical issues of how do we transform our economy. But if we are to use heritage, let's then have an honest conversation about how we came to inherit these identities that are now being questioned as well.
Absolutely. You're listening there to the insights of Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, who's a researcher with Indlulamiti South Africa Scenarios Trust, as we continue taking in the visuals from Oudtshoorn. That's where the official Heritage Day celebrations will kick off at any moment now. I think it's safe to say are well underway.